thank you for coming. This is Implied Fundamentals for Instrumentalists. First of all, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. Most of you know me. But I'm a senior here at UCM. My name is Jennifer Sanford. And I have been taking piano for a very long time. I'm also a singer, but I played flute and oboe for a while, so I know a little bit about how you have to position yourself there too. So when I was a freshman here, I was a piano major, and a few months into me starting, I actually got a serious injury, tendonitis in both arms, and it was obvious I couldn't just keep playing the way that I was. I was pretty much incapable at that point. So in order to advance, I wanted to find something both to cure me, but also to keep playing. So through Dr. Hines, I found the Taubman technique. The Taubman technique is a set of really refined movements. They help you with efficiency, but as well as keeping you from becoming injured. A lot of people have used the Taubman technique, including my teacher, Beth Grace, in order to recover from injury. And pretty serious injury too. I'm not the only one who's injured. In fact, some of you in the room experience pain and injury while you play your instrument. Can you raise your hand if that's the case? If you ever had an injury? Yeah, so a few of you have. About 25% of music students have an injury at some point. Found that in the Music Educator's Journal in the article Injury Prevention, What Music Teachers Can Do from 2010. Those numbers go up drastically once you make a career out of it. In the journal Perceptual and Motor Skills, in the article Perceptions of Causes of Performance-Related Injuries from 2004, it said that 70% of instrumentalists have an injury at some time in their career. So it's very important to address these problems, but also equip yourself with the right movements, whether or not you're injured. What I want to do throughout my lecture is address this not only to students and fellow musicians, but also to future teachers, because I myself as a teacher have grown increasingly interested in helping others keep from coming into the pain that I went through. I also want to address problems with typing and writing, because I'm not the only one who's ever had pain at the keyboard, and it's pretty necessary in this day and age, so I want to address that as well. So like I said, our goal is to increase facility, not just address the problems of injury. Technique is a form, and it is a way of increasing your ability to just play the way that you want to, live your life the way you want to. So I hope tonight I can give you the skills that you need to be able to do that. So the first half is going to be about alignment, that's on the left side there, and that will mostly be for instrumentalists. But then the second half is about arm weight, which is something more significant for pianists specifically. So first I'm going to talk about alignment. The concepts I want to get across are neutral posture, then we're going to talk about specific parts of the body and putting them in that neutral posture, and then applying that to playing your instrument or being at a desk, how you should position yourself based on those things. According to the Occupational and Environmental Health Center at the University of Connecticut Health Center, neutral posture is a resting position that creates the least tension and pressure on the nerves, tendons, muscles, and joints. So this is a position we want to return to over and over again as we're playing. This I found in What Every Musician Needs to Know About the Body by Barbara and Benjamin Konabel. This book is actually very interesting. It's about body mapping, which is just understanding how it is your body is put together and what you can do to make it work in your favor. So first I'm going to talk about the different parts of the body that I want to address. First I want to talk about your elbows. So the neutral posture for your elbows is at 90 degrees. This means that your upper arm and your forearm are at a 90-degree angle with each other. Sometimes it may be desirable to increase this angle to 110 degrees. This will be the case at the piano. This was found in the Occupational and Environmental Health Center. So the wrists is something important to address, especially with typing. one important concept, we've got two of them. One positioning for your wrists is for them to be level. So when you're looking at the plane of your forearm down to your hand, it should be completely flat all the way across. So your wrist isn't, your hand isn't higher than your arm or lower than your arm. The most pain that people go through from bad positioning in this case is when your hand is actually above your arm, so your wrist is lower. When I was playing, my wrists were too low, and then a number of other bad things that I'll tell you about later. So this is also obviously a problem at the keyboard when you're typing. A lot of people think that if you just get one of those wrist pads, then it'll like solve the problem or something. But the problem is if you're resting your hand on that and it puts you below level, like I've been talking about, it's not doing anything to cure that. Some wrist pads are high enough to help you with that though. So the second concept that we're looking at is the pinky lining up with the ulna. The ulna is the outer bone of your arm, so you think of your pinky lining up with that. Sometimes we also think about, like in the Talmud technique taught to me by Beth Grace, we think about the middle finger joint coming down the middle of the forearm. And there are a couple of really easy ways to address this. One way is to actually draw on yourself, which for kids may not be, their parents may not want that. But for you, it's a very nice visual. So you take your middle finger joint, draw all the way down the middle of your arm. And it's easy to see the minute it goes out of alignment like this. This is called twisting when this particular motion, either going in alignment that way or that way, either one. The first one I showed you is breaking at the wrist when your wrist is lower than your hand. So we want to avoid both of those. Another way that you can do this, if they don't like that you draw on their arm, is to take this piece of string, and I just tied it in a little ring here, and you just pull it up, and one thing to make sure of is that your arm is actually in a position it would be, otherwise it's just going to not do anything. So put it like next to you like you would if you were playing the piano, and then just simply tape it to the back of your forearm. So you're doing the same thing, but instead the string will slacken if you turn it one way or the other. So those are the two positions for your wrist. Next we're going to talk about the fingers. This is also equally important at the keyboard, as well as writing, and I'll get into that more later. So there are two neutral postures for your fingers. First of all, we want them to be gently curved and not curled. A lot of people will run into the problem of positioning their hand at the keyboard by thinking of things like grabbing a ball or holding something. This is false because it creates an unnatural posture for your hand. One way that you can find this, the correct position, and this was told to us by Nilly DeTrue, who's a famous piano teacher who came to UCM. She gave a talk called Technique Through Listening. You take your hand and you put it on the crown of your head, so like towards the back, but still on top. And then you just take your hand off, and there you go. So it's not very curved to the extreme. It's just kind of its natural, more like a hill, rather than anything else. Another way to find this is you can just sit and put your hands in your lap, and after a while, it may not be natural at first to just do that natural hand position, but if you don't think about it, then eventually your hands will look the right way. They just naturally go to that. So if someone has a hard time with it, just start talking to them about something else, and then eventually they'll sit in it correctly, so you can see what that looks like. The second position for your fingers is that you don't want them to be spread. This was, both of these concepts were taught by the Occupational and Environmental Health Center. So what I want you to try to do is spread out your fingers and then also curve them and try moving your fingers. It's very strange. It's very hard to do. So you can imagine after a while, if you're doing motions like this over and over again, like at the keyboard, at this keyboard, on your instrument, then you're going to have problems. So one thing I will say though is that there's a reason Talmud technique doesn't use the word relaxed. there's a correct positioning for your body, and it's not necessarily relaxed. It is a certain level of tension that you're creating, but only in so much as you have to be able to create those positions. So the next thing I want to talk about is when you're writing, a lot of people end up curving their fingers a lot to like grab the pencil because it's so much smaller. One way, one easier way to cure this is just have a bigger writing utensil. But if you're still grabbing it, it's not going to do anything. So, like I said, with the arm rests for your wrist rests for your keyboard, it's not going to do anything unless you know how to position yourself correctly. So when you're writing, what you're actually doing is finding that hand position like you were before, using the crown of your head or in your lap or something, and you're trying to mimic that when you hold something. And really and I can get into this more later if anyone has any questions, but really the control is coming from the back of your arm. So when you're writing, if you're writing where you're moving your hand like this, like a lot of people do, there's a reason you get a hand cramp, and that's because your fingers are too curled, and you're moving that like that over and over again for an extended period of time. One way to teach the not spread fingers to children is to talk about your fingers as being friends. This was taught to me by Beth Grace. They just love like saying that, like they're friends or something, you know. They're best buds, they like hanging out together. Then we're talking, there's also the doggy paws, so that's another cute one for kids as well. So when we're sitting at the instrument, there's some things we have to pay attention to. And this is also if you're just typing, if you're sitting at a desk or something. So I mentioned a lot of smaller parts of the body, but I do want to address just one big basic concept that I want you to be able to do. It's important to balance between your feet and your sit bones so that you've got that lower body stability. The reason this comes into play is, okay, so if you think of, I think this is a nice visual at the piano, if you think of taking your feet off the ground and how much you have to brace yourself in order to do that, it creates a lot of tension in your smaller muscles that are incapable of holding that for a long period of time. One thing I want to talk about is that your muscles can recover, but the problem is when you're looking at your arm and your fingers and your hand, the tendons are being used in those parts of the body, and they just can't stand that amount of pressure that your muscles could and then recover. So as much as athletes do go through injury, if you're injuring something smaller, it's harder to come back from that. It's taken me years and I still experience pain. So. Okay, so we want to think about, one thing about taking your feet off the ground is it makes you think of that extreme, of if I did something that was so, not so bad, but so much different, and then think of just even the slightest feet underneath the bench rather than having them stabilized. You kind of see what that could do to you. And especially if a child, if you're having a hard time convincing a student the importance of something, take it to the extreme and see how they feel about it. That brings me to another important concept. We always want to ask ourselves and our students, how does it feel? So if you're learning how to do something or you're positioning yourself at the instrument, how does that feel when you do this or when you do that? That really helps in these extremes too, to show the importance of this is what you should be doing. The how does it feel question came from Mary Moran when I went to a pedagogy clinic with her last summer. So one thing I want to show you, since I have one of my students here, Mia, would you like to come up? I've been teaching Mia for just a little while. We've been kind of working on some of these concepts. And I want to show you the importance of, especially with a child, the thing is, obviously your feet don't touch the ground. So you have to address this concept if they're having troubles with this. I've just got a makeshift box here. I just took a shoe box, and she can put her feet on there. Maybe that's, of course, you've got a bigger box. So you can try a bigger box. See how that goes. So that she can feel that stable concept of having the balance between her feet and her sit bones. So another prop that I have are these tiles. And these are just like children's playroom tiles, but they're really cheap when you just buy a few of them. So what you can do is you can just figure out how many of these tiles does she need to be able to play correctly. One thing I want to address before I talk about that is why we even need to use this. So we're positioning ourselves based on having our elbow, if you want to put your hand up a little, in case. Our elbow is going to be lined up with the bottom of the keys when you're at the piano. This is also important if you're typing in a keyboard. So if you're sitting to where you're lower than your keyboard, you're going to have problems because you're coming out of that neutral posture and you're staying there for a long time. So if her elbow, her elbow is too low. It's lower than the bottom there. So we can just start making small adjustments here. You can go and stand on that. That's good. Okay. And we try a few tiles. And then you just see, you want to put your hands up again? And we want to notice the difference here. See whether it's what we want. Now this is a little high. So I don't know if you can see. Like here's the keyboard, and then she's like that. So her elbow is a little bit too high. So you just keep adjusting until you have the right thing. You can go and sit down. Thanks for coming in. All right. So you just continually adjust. And the thing is, if you work this positioning into their daily routine, if they come in lesson every time and they have to fix the bench before they even do anything else, then they're building up that habit that will help them later with other things. So, the important thing about teaching alignment is that it creates a habit. If they're doing the wrong thing, they're creating a bad habit. I had a lot of very bad habits. Every single one of these things that I said are things that I wasn't doing correctly. And over time, that caused my injury. So the important thing about alignment is you have to insist on it. You have to say it over and over again because that's what teachers do. And that's what gets them to do the right thing. So that is my part about alignment. I think I forgot to mention, but now you can ask questions about alignment. Does anyone have any questions about anything I talked about? Even for keyboard or writing, because there were a lot of things I kind of glossed over that I could go into more depth. Yeah.
Like in the practice rooms, what if you can't like have your bench at the height you want? How can you avoid?
Right. Well, the thing is, there's no faking it, for one. I mean, everyone has a lot of books, so if nothing else, you can always get books. But these were like $1.60 each, and I got them within like 2 days. So if you're really serious about making a change and positioning yourself in the right way, go for it, do it. Because you won't be sorry.
Yeah.
A lot of the benches in the practice room are too high for grown-ups. Like they assume that kids are going to be, especially on the keyboards, the electronic keyboards.
Yeah.
So that's unfortunate. So that's one of the things that we, in the piano lab, we tried to put the keyboards up on a block. And I've noticed it's not high enough anyway.
Yeah.
Because people are still like this. So I need to get some more blocks. But that's something, if you have a keyboard at home, you can put it up on wooden pieces so you can get closer, because I've yet to meet an actual human being who's the right size for those,
right.
The chair and that keyboard thing. It's just, it is what it is.
Yeah, and I have a hard time, like even these don't go high enough. They're adjustable, but they're just not the correct height for me. So you just gotta do what you gotta do sometimes, In the practice rooms too, I know there's a variety of different things that you could try out to sit on. I mean, I know they're like interspersed throughout the rooms.
Mm-hmm.
Do what you gotta. Yes.
So would you say it's just as important to practice when you are the instrument at the piano, but like when you are, I mean, I would suspect most of you are typing some for papers and things.
Right.
So should you make sure, like, would it be something that you want to do throughout everything that you do and not just when you sit down at the piano?
I would suggest it. It's a really hard thing, I think, to get yourself to do constantly. It was hard enough for me, and I had an injury, and I knew that those things would help. But yeah, when I was injured, I had a hard time even putting my hair up. So it was everything, every part of my life. Couldn't open doors, like, you know. So obviously anything to avoid that is ideal, you know. Taking those preventative.
And I was even thinking, like, students now with laptops, and they, I don't know how many,
Yeah.
that's pretty much not a lack of alignment. I'm just going to guess. You know. So,
My
Yeah.
doctor actually recommended to me to buy one of the lap desks
Yes.
to use for that situation.
Oh, one thing I do actually have, talking about that, is I just got for Christmas this adjustable, it's like something that a dentist or a physical therapist would use. It's completely adjustable, it's just this little desk, and you can lift it or lower it as much as you want. So if I have an adjustable chair as well, so I can just completely change however I need to be. So anything to help. It's really good. I want to emphasize, like, it's really important to be above, just a little bit above what you're doing. This will also apply to, we're going to talk about arm weight in a bit, but that will also apply to that. So if you're above, you can feel that weight coming down. I think that's really important to realize. Yeah.
I'm a piano novice. I don't know exactly what's already discussed normally in classes, but as far as moving along the piano, I know that sometimes there's extension involved and different rotation. Is there any assessment you can do in different positions, or should you just continually go back and make sure that you feel the same relaxed?
Well, when you're moving across the keyboard, there are a lot of things I left out that I know. But when you're moving across the keyboard, in Tauman technique, we talk about having your elbow come out and follow you. So you're feeling a little bit of extension, but the thing is, when your arm is coming out with it, you're still kind of maintaining that same position. So that you're not, especially a lot of people have trouble with twisting whenever they change the register that they play in or something, especially when it's in front of the body. So if you're playing in front of here, like you have this whole, because your arms are further out and then your hands are further in, so you have this whole awkward thing going on. But it's important to, like when you're moving up or something like that, you compensate with your leg coming out and then you lead. So your arm is moving, your whole body is moving with you. And that's very important.
We're still looking for that adjacent.
Yes,
Yeah.
same thing. Yeah, over and over again. One thing I will say too, though, is that your arm obviously can't go as far out as the piano is. It's just incapable. But playing, like, I don't know how to show this, but when you're playing up here, it's going to be to the side on the keys rather than straight. Does that make sense?
Yeah, rather than like completely 90-degree adjacent to it.
Yeah, like in position to your body.
Hmm.
So it's going to kind of be out, and then your fingers are going to kind of play to the side, but it's still going to be in alignment. Does that make sense? Yes?
With the handwriting thing, that's what I'm most interested in.
Yeah.
And you grip too tight, but when you changed everything, did it still hurt sometimes, or
Yes.
it did? All right, and did that affect like handwriting or speed or anything? Or did it take a long time
Yes,
to adjust?
it definitely slows you down to relearn anything that you're doing. When you're doing the writing, when you are using your arm, obviously it's a bigger muscle, so it kind of has less control. So for a while, my teacher actually suggested getting wide ruled because I love college ruled, I love writing small. But when you need to use your arm, it's going to kind of fly about just for a little, you know. But I think you get used to it, and I think it's very possible to do it correctly and do it that way. So.
Did you use a bigger grip? Like, did you use one of those, those rubber grip things that they have for pencils or no?
Mostly what I use now, and I've thought about getting bigger pens, but sometimes the bigger pens don't necessarily have the flowy writing. So that's why I use these. These are actually like more like normal pen size, but the ink flows better, so you don't have to like press down to get the ink to come out. So that's why I do that, and my teacher suggested them. They're Uniball Vision Elite. Like, they're really nice. I love these pens. So, anything else?
One thing I'll just throw in, because people may not realize, like you mentioned that, the tendons don't bounce back as quickly. The reason for that is they don't have their own vascular supply. They don't have their own blood supply. And if you're going to heal your muscles, those muscles are very vascular. So when you, pull your something, calf muscle or something like that, there's a way for those cells to heal. A tendon doesn't have that. It just has to wait. And that could be years.
Yeah, and the thing about that too is it's not even just waiting, unfortunately. I will always have a tendency to have pain when I'm doing anything with my arms. But the way I'm avoiding that is by doing these habits. The minute I stop doing that, I have pain again. So it's not something I don't think you recover from. And I know a lot of other injured that are in the same, it's the same thing for them, so.
I think I won't get off of the soapbox, but we look at sports figures and they're like, yeah, I played through my broken leg, yeah, look at me. Well, yeah, that was a broken leg. That was a very big muscle with lots of vascular supply. It's gonna heal, and I take steroids and all sorts of other crazy things.
Yeah.
But a little tendon, a little ligament, once it gets inflamed, it doesn't. So we have to move away. When you said like all these professional musicians have injuries, it's true. In the sports world, we think, yeah, because you're an athlete. What runner doesn't have a hamstring injury and call themselves worthy? But a professional musician should strive, I think, to not have that situation because it is not as glorified. It is not full of glory the way that
And I would even say, even in the sports world, there's been more emphasis on stretching and how you build your muscles to make sure that you don't get injured, because it's a huge investment to the
team or whoever.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing is they have all this medicine developed to help them. Music medicine has been around about 30 years, so it's still in its very early stages. Luckily, it is out there now, though. When my teacher got injured, there was nothing for a while, so it's kind of exciting that there are things out there now. Any other questions? Yeah.
What advice would you give to instrumentalists who don't play piano? I'm thinking mostly of bassoon, where people with small hands like me have to stretch their fingers to reach the. So, what kind of preventative stuff could me and like my kind do to not get because hand injuries are very common in bassoonists.
Yeah. One big thing they teach is, even though you're spreading your hand, obviously for piano you have to spread it too. That's just a fact. Like chords, octaves, things like that. But when you can come back, like put your hand together, your fingers together. If you're just playing a note where it's just like one finger is doing something, take that opportunity to like rest your hand, because it really does make a difference having those pauses. Any chance to release that tension that you're having from doing that is going to help. Anything else? Cool. Alrighty, well we will start with arm weight. Okay, so there's kind of a few more things going on here. What we're going to talk about first are the benefits of using arm weight, then the procedure for both learning it but then teaching someone else how to do it, and then guidelines for if you're teaching it, what you should do. So arm weight can be applied not only to the piano but to typing. And it may seem odd once I start talking about it how that could be true, because the movements are rather large at first. So what we'll start out doing is something like this, and it's a lot, right? You would never type like this for every single note, or for every single letter. But over time that becomes a smaller movement. Even on piano, obviously, we never come up, I mean, unless it's for dramatic effect. The weight happens and it's kind of invisible. So over time you can build up the skill of being able to put the weight into it without doing those exaggerated things. But it does take time. I will say before I even get started, it took me 2 months. I was already playing for 13 years when I tried to relearn everything. Well, more like 11. But that's a really long time to be building up those same habits. The thing about arm weight is it took me 2 months to learn it. And that was when that was the only thing I was doing the entire time. My practice at the piano was like dropping my arm for 10, 15 minutes a day, as long as I could do. But it's worth it. It's worth it in the end for several reasons. First of all, it's going to create a fuller sound. When I was first playing, and Dr. Hines may remember this, I had kind of a thin sound and I had no idea how to fix it. There were also a lot of issues creating volume. I couldn't get very loud at all. It was very forced and like grabbing and just really hard to do. So this kind of creates some ease of creating that volume that we want to be able to have the dynamic range. It also helps create evenness in passages, as Amber, my student, can attest. She's had some success with this. The reason that it does this is because the weight is spread on every single note that you play has the arm weight, rather than just relying on the finger's ability to do something. So this brings me to the importance of it. Your fingers aren't the only ones doing something when you play. Yet another thing I was doing wrong. So my fingers were only playing and that was it. So we want to avoid the isolation, which is why we use such big motions at first, is we're trying to get these bigger muscles involved in the process. We also obviously want to prevent injury by learning this. So part of the reason I had problems was because my fingers were coming down and my arm weight was being held up. So it was creating a lot of like tension, doing kind of the opposite thing of each other. So we want to avoid that too. So Amber, if you wouldn't mind coming up. First thing that I want you to do, I want you all to try it out if you can. The easiest way to figure out how heavy your arm is to actually just hold yours, or, well, you can't really hold your own, but hold someone else's and see what that feels like. So if you can, try it. And the thing is, a lot of people, if you're trying this, a lot of people will like hold their shoulder or hold some other part of their, like their elbow, they'll hold it out rather than like let go. So try to think of, it should feel pretty heavy. Like, I don't know how heavy, but pretty heavy. Heavier than you think an arm would be. The next thing that we can do, and this is really fun for kids, like get them up and moving around, is to swing their arms. So you want to stand up? You've been sitting a while. Swing your arms around. And you can kind of get a sense of like how heavy they feel when they're in motion like this. You can sit down if you want. The next thing that's really helpful is to use your lap, especially as a way to test your own weight for yourself. So when you, if you want to scoot back so you when you lift up your arms and then you drop them on your lap, you can feel that weight dropping on your legs. So you have your own kind of feedback for it. One thing I will say as we're getting to this is that it's not something that's like, you're not like pulling it down, when kids get mad or you get mad or something. You're not like stomping on the ground, like it's just letting it go. One way to help with this too is to like stick them out like this. Kids like this too. And then just drop. So you're still feeling them on their leg, but it's more an extreme. And it's more an initiated action. You have to decide when to drop. Like they're holding them very consciously and then let them go. This is what we are trying to develop, is be able to let go of your arm weight on command, which people aren't born with the ability to do, but it helps us a lot here. The next thing that I want to talk about is one piece. This just means that we're using one piece of our body. Elbow to finger is one unit. We're going to move it all together. One way to talk about that is to say that we're doing B, then L. That was something Mary Moran taught me. So, and a kid can easily look down and see there's a B and there's an L. One way to help, we kind of did a lack of control, just completely like dropping your arms and stuff like that. But eventually, you have to use the piano and it has to be controlled in some manner. But we can start with a fall board. And what we do there is just the same thing. We create the B, then the L, and we're just dropping onto the fall board. One thing you'll want to note about using this is that it's a lot harder to do unless they're positioned at the right height. Like we talked about earlier, it's very important to do that. So where did I put those? They're over here. So if we want to add a couple of these, then we can get her at the right height to be able to do this. So elbow lined up with the fall board so that she can feel the drop. That looks pretty good. Yep, and the thing about this too is you're adding a small aspect of control, but it's not controlled all the way because you can drop your hands completely flat and you don't have to worry about, hand position and all that stuff because that gets kind of hard. Eventually though, it is kind of useful to use your fingertips on the fall board. This is because they don't have to worry about what notes that they're playing. A lot of children get preoccupied with having their fingers covering certain keys, and then it's hard to get just one finger to play at a time. And you can avoid that problem entirely by using the fall board. Then we go to the keyboard, and there's a certain order that you should use the fingers, simply because it's easier. You want to make this first acquisition of using the arm weight pretty easy for them. So using fingers that more easily play by themselves, and you have a little bit more control naturally rather than 4 and 5. So we're using like the easier parts of the hand, 2, 3, and 1. And one reason, I think 2 is kind of easier because you're not worrying about the finger joint sometimes goes flat rather than staying nice and curved. On the 3, I think, more than the 2. So that's why I put that one first. And it's important to note that when you start teaching the thumb, that it's in the right position so that you're not doing any of the broken wrist stuff. Your thumb goes all the way back to the back of your hand. And if they're not playing more on the tip of their thumb, then they're going to lose the whole point of doing this. If you're not in alignment, the arm weight isn't going to do anything. Oh, another thing too is to start with your dominant hand. Another reason, it's just easier. It's just easier for them to get the feeling and to get used to it. That I learned from my teacher, Beth Grace. Another thing to do is to start playing with multiple fingers. So once they kind of have a sense, maybe they don't quite get 4 and 5 yet, but a way to help them, especially in their hand position, is to start using 1 and 5 at the same time. So like, one thing you have to watch out for though is when you're playing 1 and 5, a lot of people, and I did this too, have a tendency to fall on the side of the pinky side of their hand without making it flat all the way across. Any collapsing creates added tension, and it kind of gets rid of the whole good things about arm weight that we want to keep. One thing too, if they're having problems with falling onto that side of their hand, one thing that you can do is actually take your hand and like put it underneath that side, like where the joints are collapsing. It's like right underneath the joints that are visible on the top of the hand. So you're doing that underneath so when they fall, they know what that feels like. It's strange, but it's kind of it's a habit that you build. And at first you don't really know what it feels like to support them if you're naturally just letting those joints go. So by supporting them, you're showing them this is what it's supposed to feel like. And eventually you get used to that and you can just do it without any extra. So same thing goes for individual fingers. If they're having a hard time, especially at the joint that's closest to the nail, they're having a hard time making that like flat, you can put your finger under that as well. And it's really most effective if you actually hold their arm too. So you're holding their arm and you're kind of showing them, here's how you do that. Like that. Alrighty, so there's some things that I've kind of touched on that you need to monitor, and these are mostly from the alignment part. The hardest and most important thing is to monitor the complete release of the arm. One way to do this is continuously practicing, give me your arm weight, and then they can do it. And that takes time. She can do it right away. But for, for a lot of kids, it will take some time. No, all kids, it will take time for you to develop that. So having that every single time you come with the keyboard. Eventually the speed increases so that you're just saying, give me your arm weight, and then it's immediate. But usually it starts out slower and it speeds up. So practicing that with them over and over again. What you can do is like do that before they touch a note, and then they just go and they do the V then L on their own, and you don't part of that. Or if you want to try to feel it for yourself, you can lift their arm up and then have them release it at that point where they're coming down to play a note. One thing I haven't really addressed is how to do this when you're at a keyboard, like a typing keyboard. You will have to practice it away from the keyboard because obviously you're just going to fall and all kinds of letters are going to be pushed. But you can do it like at a desk, for instance, just kind of, or I mean, if you're around pianos all the time like we are, just fall on the fall board. Do anything you have to kind of get that sense. Some will pick it up quicker than others. I kind of just told her, here's what arm weight is, and she was just able to do it because it was just something that came naturally. Sometimes, the thing about this work is that sometimes people do it and they were never told. And so it seems like some people just naturally can just do things and you feel bad about yourself, but really it's not anything to be concerned with because I think everyone needs to be taught at some point. Otherwise you're just going to do whatever, whatever comes out, whatever happens. Another thing to monitor is the supported fall. So we're looking at that level wrist that we talked about. Balanced hand, which means that it's like the knuckles are flat all the way across, so it's not like falling on the side like I was talking about. And then your fingers are going to have a curve but not curl. This is a major problem with using arm weight, is that people tend to curl to play, to push their finger onto a note. If you're doing that, like I said, it's not going to get rid of any of that tension or the problem that you're having if you're playing with pain. I can go and sit down. So some guidelines for teaching this. After a while, it can get kind of frustrating if you just keep working on this over and over again. A lot of kids, of course, want to play. The reason you're here is you want to play the piano. So really just working on this 5 to 10 minutes in the lesson is the most helpful so that they can develop the skill, but at the same time you're not lingering on it forever. A kid doesn't have enough focus to work on that forever. So another thing is to practice, when you send them out to start practicing this, have them practice 5 minutes 3 times a day. Obviously not every student would go out and do this, but it's the ideal for allowing them to acquire it. Otherwise you're just going to spend forever on it in a lesson like you would with any other piece. If they're not practicing it, they're not going to get it. Both of these guidelines were taught to me by Mary Marian. Another guideline about this process is, especially if you don't understand a lot about Taubman technique, is that it's hard to teach this to anyone but beginners. The reason for this is if they've already played, they just want to play. So they aren't going to want to go back and be like, this is how I move my arm in a very extreme way when they're used to just playing like, any number of things, many notes at a time, stuff like that. So for me, since I was injured, it was very important for me to go back and do that. So if you are, then you may consider developing those skills anyway. So that's it for arm weight. Does anyone have any questions? Maybe more about how to apply this to keyboard. Yeah.
What is that? Drip, drop, and roll.
Drip, drop, and roll. Okay, so that's something I did with Mia. And that's something where you actually, you're using the whole drop concept on your lap. But it starts with a drip, of course. We got the dripping here. So our fingers, like you think of rain droplets coming down. So you're holding it, so you feel what it's like to hold it up. And then just drop the weight down. And then another thing is getting the roll. So you're actually understanding how some people have a hard time like just raising their wrists, like they'll want to raise their arms. And I'm like, well, your wrist needs to be level, but I don't want you going like this. So that's one way to get the natural feeling of putting the wrists where they need to be. Because really your fingers kind of dangle down from there if you're at the keyboard. That was actually from the Helen Marley's
was it? Okay.
technique books, yeah. Anything else?
One thing I'll throw in that Alita, my teacher, had said to me,
Mhm.
lest you feel like, oh, but I'm not a beginner and I've been playing piano for a piano class forever and oh, it's too late. No, I don't think it's too late for anybody, but it does, like she said, take some dedicated today I'm going to think about this. And it's hard to do, like when you've got a proficiency, it seems to take care of like in 3 weeks or something like that. But I think it is worth doing. I also, Nolita told me that she was not a teacher of beginner. She never saw a beginner in the last 50 years, so she wouldn't know what to do with them because they came right after her. But she actually felt she would not, she said, I would feel comfortable with a beginner because I don't know what kind of body awareness. She liked dealing with adults who have body awareness, and by doing some of the exercises, you know, just like doing the exercises, like, okay, so here's this. And what she did with us at the Eastman School, all the first year students, whether you were healthy or not, or doctoral student or freshman, we all had to take a class where we just did this. In the first 2 or 3 months, that's all we did, until she felt satisfied that everybody could produce that drop on command. And we would literally sit there in the practice room, even though I was a doctoral student, you know, I'm like, shouldn't I be done with this now, you know? And then I'd be like, all right, test me, and my friend would come and she'd like, no, not, and literally she would watch us and we would have to produce it whatever number of times. And as soon as she felt like we were going like, she'd be like, nope, sit down, next. And you'd have to come back the next week and you have to be able to do it. And that, at the beginning I thought, what's this for? You know, I'm very loose, I'm very healthy, I already played piano, Oh, it was literally revolutionary to me. After a year of doing this with her, maybe I didn't change the way I played radically. I was one of those people who naturally used arm weight, but I used it so much smarter. So, and also much more efficiently. And so I was whatever, in my mid-20s, and I thought, oh, I'm done. I was not done at all. I got started at that point. So now this is why I'm so excited about a student at this level of study thinking about it now, because, oh, you just get that much farther. So I wave the flag for yes, try it.
Anything else?
Well, let me ask you one, since Mia is here. In your experience with her, not to like put you on the spot or anything, but or with other kids that you've tried this with, and now you've had some adult students, have you found there to be a difference in their kind of response time? I mean, do they pick it up equally quickly?
You know, it's not actually, interestingly enough, it's not necessarily across ages. It just depends on the person. Like, I just started teaching a couple new students that I am showing this arm weight to. One of them has never touched a piano, and she's already really tight. Like, her fingers she's always like grabbing and things like that. So trying to get her let go of that is just like night and day. And then she's been playing for like 6 years. Took a little break, but has been playing for that long, and she was able to acquire it almost. I just said, hey, arm weight, and then it was nearly instant. So yeah, just depends. Everyone's different. And I think just being aware, depending on how much the child has developed their own body awareness, kind of makes a big difference. If they don't really know, like that same student that I was talking about, she didn't really know that she was tight. She's like, no, I feel fine. I'm like, no, you're very tight. I don't know how to say this. So I tried to work with the extremes on her with that and just show her this is tight. And I think she noticed the difference. So.
T-Rex.
T-Rex arms. That was something we talked about. To show like we're just talking about elbow and nothing else. Like our arms aren't moving around like a chicken. So like T-Rex arms because they're cut off here. So if you're at the keyboard, it's just like this, and that's it.
You remember